Hello, I'm Celeste, and I'm so excited about what I'm going to talk about today. It's something I really get into, something that some people think is kind of silly, but when it comes to cryptids, I absolutely love story and legends surrounding Mothman. And I really love all cryptids. Like, say what you will about cryptids, I think there's something so fascinating about the possibility that they exist. It's also really fun for me to discuss stories where no one has been murdered. As much as I'm interested in crime, lighter topics like this really break it up and give me something fun to talk about. Although a lot of these aspects of the story aren't really that lighthearted, but the idea of cryptids kind of silly and lighthearted at times. So, what is Mothman? Where did the legend come from? So it began in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in November of 1966. The first account came from gravediggers who reported that a huge winged figure that looked like a brown human was flying above their heads, going from tree to tree. A few days after that, two couples were in the local woods. I think they were doing some kind of lover's lane thing and fled out of it terrified, claiming that they had seen an entity. While they said it was mostly human looking, it also had what they estimated to be a 10-foot wingspan and glowing red eyes. And they approximated that the eyes were about 6 inches apart. They said that the creature seemed to want to avoid the car's headlights and could fly very, very fast, even estimating it to be up to 100 miles an hour. Now, I know when you're really panicked, when you're in situations like that, I don't think they're getting the best glimpse of it. If you are terrified, you aren't going to be like, let me line it up. Okay, yeah, that's about 6 inches and about a 10-foot wingspan. So I would put some wiggle room on the guesses, not because I doubt these people, but just because when you're in a panic situation, it is really difficult to accurately gauge those things. And the 100 miles an hour could be measured maybe by the speed of their car. So if they were driving out of the woods, then they would be able to kind of guess the speed based on their own speed. But the wingspan and the eyes, I could go either way on that, and if I believe it. In any case, they did say that they knew about the speed because this entity chased their car out of the woods, and then once they got to the outskirts of town, it turned around and went into a field. They did also say that despite its flying ability, it was really clumsy on the ground, so it was a lot more agile in the air, and it was not very graceful or agile on the ground. The couples then recounted the story to the local sheriff, and they were absolutely frightened. They were terrified. They had seen something that had just scared them so badly. What did they really see in the woods that day, though? You know how groups of people can react to things, freak out, freak each other out, react more and more to things. So one person, oh, I hear that. The second person starts listening and they hear something, and then suddenly the whole group is panicking and running, and maybe it was like a squirrel or something. So I don't know if they're getting all amped up over nothing, but they were all terrified, and they had definitely experienced something that they had a shared story about. So I don't know how much of this was a real entity that they saw, but I do know that the local newspaper jumped on this story. It really caught everyone's attention, and they wrote about the Mothman. And within a couple days, a bunch of people from the town showed up at the location where this enigmatic creature had first been encountered. They were up in arms. They were carrying guns and ready to hunt this thing down. But they didn't find any sign of it. They went on this whole hunt. It reminds me of like in Beauty and the Beast, kill the beast, that kind of thing. They were ready to go out and kill this creature, but they never found it. So I don't know. However, over the next few days, there were 8 more reported sightings of this creature. Some people called it a large bird with red eyes, but the 4 people who saw it in the woods said that it definitely had a human form. So although it had wings, which maybe added a bird-like aspect, they said that the form itself was human. The sightings weren't confined to Point Pleasant either, but were reported in other nearby areas in West Virginia. There was a man from Salem, West Virginia, who reported that one night he noticed a strange pattern appearing on his TV, and he heard a strange sound outside, so he went to investigate and saw a pair of glowing red eyes outside of his house. There were also some that suspect that Mothman played a part in the disappearance of this man's dog, very sadly. So from here, this Mothman, as it was called, went from a local creature spotting to a creature of legends that is famous across the world. One of the things that sets Mothman apart from legends like Bigfoot is that there is a definite start date and first sighting that prompted the legend to begin. So they have a time where they are like, this is when this creature was first sighted, whereas Bigfoot's kind of been carried on and on over the years, and there's been sightings here and there for a long, long time.
All right, we are in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So this is where the Mothman legend came to life, and we are, in fact, on the intersection with the famous Mothman statue. So here it is. This is what Mothman supposedly looks like. I've always wanted to go and see it. I know it's just a statue, but I thought it'd be cool to look at it kind of from this view instead of just put up a picture. Sort of give a bigger view of it. So this thing is actually pretty terrifying. These wings, I was like wondering why they call it Mothman per se, because they describe it as being very bird-like. And there are very many bird-like aspects to it. For example, you see the feet here and the clawed hands, but it does look very human as well, and the wings definitely look like butterfly or moth wings, so way more than bird wings, so there you go, it's Mothman. And right around here, there's supposed to be a Mothman museum of some kind as well. If you look here, this is where we are on the map, and the Mothman Museum is right here. Let me look around. Not actually seeing it. But anyway, this is the town that originated the Mothman legend. Looks pretty cute and fun. I'm not exactly sure. Oh yeah, it's a little down this way where the museum was. Oh, there it is. Okay, I didn't even see it. Okay, so this here is the Mothman Museum, which I would love to visit sometime. It's right next to the Mothman statue. And looking around here, I am not exactly sure where it was that Mothman was spotted. I'm assuming it's somewhere in here because it looks wildernessy. And it said it stopped chasing them when they got to the outskirts of town. So it could be anywhere in these green areas, I'm assuming. And then once they got to town, it stopped chasing them. But it was seen all over in this area. I believe in Henderson there was a sighting. And there's not much else to show you around here right now, but I wanted to just give a quick street view of the statue, the museum, and what it looks like around here in this area. Maybe I can go see like what the woods and stuff look like a little bit more. So these are more the outskirts of town. So we saw inside the town. Now this is what you'd see more outside the town. There's not really mountains, but there's some bigger hills, a lot of trees. It's kind of neat. I actually think it's really beautiful out here. I would absolutely love to see it, but don't see Mothman right now. That's for sure.
Because Mothman was originally described as being bird-like, there are some people who speculate that it was a deformed sandhill crane, which can stand near the height of a human and has red around its eyes. The area where Mothman was spotted was near an old World War II manufacturing bunker, and some say that it could have leaked toxic material and impacted local wildlife. But it just doesn't seem likely. Sandhill cranes don't have a human form. I feel like there's more to it. If people are seeing some weird ass crane, I think that they would know that it was some kind of crane and not a giant creature that flew at them. I mean, I don't know about that explanation. I don't know that Mothman is real, but I also don't know about that explanation for sure. Another of the really popular ideas is that there was a very dedicated prankster who even hid in the area of the bunkers to pull off the hoax. There's also speculation that Mothman resembled a figure seen by people experiencing sleep paralysis. So this is just a collection of fears from the human consciousness that, when seen at night in the dark, maybe paired with the movement of an animal, created a really frightening figure in the minds of people. So the idea that Mothman sort of resembles something that's been reported by people with sleep paralysis, and they're saying maybe these people just were tapping into some global unconscious primal human fear, and from there, like, creating this imagery. And once it had been suggested in the community, it kept going and gained traction. But so proponents of this theory say that the people would create this image from movement of an animal or some kind of hysteria that they created together and became convinced that they saw a monster. Here's where we get to one of the strangest and most sinister ideas that's related to the origin of the Mothman legend, and this is the idea that Mothman caused the tragedy that happened in Point Pleasant shortly after it was first sighted, or it was a harbinger of doom for what happened next. What I'm talking about here is the collapse of the Silver Bridge. So on December 15th of 1967, so not long after the first sightings of Mothman and Mothman's appearance, there was a huge tragedy that occurred on the Silver Bridge that was built in 1928 to connect Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio. I don't know if I'm saying that right. On this day, a traffic accident caused a huge traffic buildup, and the bridge was absolutely packed with cars. So keep in mind that at the time when the bridge was built, there were some errors that occurred and some things that weren't factored in or weren't considered when building the bridge, and also weren't considered later in the upkeep of the bridge. For one, cars were way heavier in 1967 than in 1928 when the bridge was first built. The Model T car was about 1,500 pounds, and an average car in 1967 would be about 4,000 pounds. So the bridge wasn't really built with the intention of holding that much weight, especially being full of cars, and then especially being full of cars that were that heavy or that much heavier than was anticipated at the time. Now, the other thing that I think was a huge error on the part of the engineers who built it at the time was that it wasn't built with any redundancies. This means that if there was a failure in one part of the bridge, there was nothing else to reinforce or back up that error and prevent other parts from failing. So usually when things are constructed, there's redundancies. So if one part fails, there's a time where other parts can compensate for that until it can be repaired. But this was not built with any redundancies at all. So if a part failed, the whole thing was coming down pretty much. So what I'm picturing here is kind of like something out of Final Destination. You know, the one little thing goes wrong and everything else fails from there. So while the bridge was packed, a small beam near the top of the bridge on the Ohio side cracked, causing catastrophic failure in the structure of the bridge. As the chain snapped, the structure collapsed, and the bridge and the cars on it fell into the icy water below. In total, as a result of the bridge collapse, 46 people died, either by drowning or being crushed. Completely tragic. Here I'm going to jump into a quick video of the location of the Silver Bridge and more or less what it looks like today.
The other thing that there really is to see in Point Pleasant here is, as we were talking about, the collapse of the Silver Bridge, that tragedy that was weirdly, but also not weirdly, connected to Mothman. It obviously doesn't look the same now, but I believe this was where the bridge was. There's a plaque here dedicated to the Silver Bridge. And now there's a bridge up here that you can see that is now the bridge that goes across the river to Ohio. So that's a little different. That's like a train bridge. Now if you walk this way to where the bridge was, you go through here, it just kind of dead ends here. And I don't know when all of this was built, but as you can see, this is the Ohio River. That's Point Pleasant. I don't know how to say that town name, so I'm not going to try to say it again. But the bridge would have been here. There's this bridge now. As you can see the railroad bridge down there. And I'm assuming that that is what got built instead once the bridge collapsed.
So now that we saw the bridge plaque and the area, I have to ask, how is this related to Mothman though? It seems like the result of poor engineering and lack of upkeep and updating. The bridge itself was not rebuilt in the same location, but a bridge was built to cross the Ohio River in 1969, and about a mile away from the original Silver Bridge. Well, how is this related to Mothman? It is because this was the second bizarre and terrible thing to happen in this small town in such a short amount of time. The two started being linked together. So first you have these strange, bizarre, unexplained sightings of a weird creature that's scaring people, and the next you have an horrible, tragic bridge collapse that killed a lot of people. So particularly in 1975, author John Keel connected the two events in his book, The Mothman Prophecies. He threw in some UFO activity for good measure, and suddenly Mothman and the town were an iconic place for those interested in paranormal events, UFOs, and conspiracy theories. There was a pretty strange movie made based on this book in 2002, which brought renewed attention to the legend of Mothman as well. So in the book, Mothman Prophecies really talks a lot about aliens. There's a lot of focus on UFOs, aliens, and the author makes connections to aliens throughout the book. I really wish I could talk to the author about this book because it was definitely a trip to read, but by no means boring at all. I recommend reading it. It was very interesting, and it was well written too. The movie relates to some of the incidents that happened in the book. It has a great cast, well-known people. Instead of being focused on aliens, however, it focuses on the entity that acts as a harbinger to foretell disasters. Particularly and especially, it focuses on the collapse of the Silver Bridge and how Mothman was there and how sightings at the time are related to that disaster. It really seems to have stuck in the minds of people that so soon after the sightings, there was this horrible disaster that struck the town, and these two just became linked forever. However, with Mothman, there haven't been many sightings since the 1960s when he first made an appearance. Interestingly, there was someone in 2016 who claimed to have seen a creature leaping from tree to tree, and also claimed that he was unaware of the legend of Mothman until he saw the strange creature himself. Although I find that a little hard to believe that he had never heard of it, because I think most people have heard of Mothman, and you know, there's a statue and a museum, and it's a pretty famous legend. So if he's living anywhere near Point Pleasant, even if he'd recently moved, I feel like he would have heard of Mothman. So I'm really iffy on this thing. I'm not saying he didn't see something. I'm not saying he did. I'm just saying that the claim that he had never heard of it seems a little weird to me, especially living anywhere near that area. Mothman has a statue. There's a store, or museum, a storefront anyway, dedicated to Mothman. Like, how are you going to avoid this? Maybe because of the Silver Bridge collapse, Mothman became known as a harbinger of doom. He seemed to foretell tragic occurrences with his appearance. So what do you think? Is Mothman real? Were the sightings a hoax, a delusion, or some unknown cryptid? Was it a crane? I'm super confused by what it possibly could have been if it wasn't some strange creature, so I'm super curious as to what you think and if you've heard any more interesting stories of Mothman.